Hello world, this is Lisa Friedrichsen, your friend and professor from Johnson County Community College. And in this short screencast, we're going to talk about the elements that create the items in the form. In the previous screencast, we talked about the opening form tag and its required attributes of action and method, as well as the fact that the name attribute names each piece of data, and that those three attributes are critical in terms of passing the information successfully to your web page developer, who will write some sort of program, probably PHP or ASP.NET, that will process this data. So I've left those attribute values blank just to emphasize that you're going to have to work with your backend developer to fill in the correct values. But the rest of these elements and attributes are really up to you, the front-end developer, to determine and to place correctly on the page. So let's just look at them. The field set element can be used to organize several pieces of information together. It's strictly optional. It just allows you to style it in such a way to organize your form a little bit more effectively. And I've got two field set areas: the customer information, which is tagged with legend tags, and the field set for share your experience in these two different columns. The real workhorse of the form is the input element. The input element is the element that you see that creates these boxes for you to type into. Typically, every input box has a descriptive label that goes with it to describe what the user is supposed to type into the input box. So typically you'll see label, which is a paired tag with text, and then that label will be created for a particular input box. Now this is very important. The for attribute of the label must match the ID value for the input box. So this label goes for this input box. We already know the ID attribute. That uniquely identifies that particular element. For accessibility purposes and screen readers, that's why we want the for attribute value of the label to match the ID attribute value of the input box. So if I click on a label, I immediately send the focus to that particular input box, which works well for all kinds of people, but particularly works well for those who are dealing with accessibility issues. Let's look at the other attributes of the input box as well. The first is the type attribute. It doesn't have to be first, but it just makes sense to be first because it tells us the type of data that we're going to be typing into that input box. Now, most of these are going to be text because most of the time the field data type is text that you're sending. Obviously, any name or street address. So most of the types are text. For most of the fields, we're sending textual information. But here's a new type to be aware of, TEL, T-E-L. This type means that when we look at this web page on a mobile device and we tap that telephone number, we can send that number to the phone and place a call. That's a new type for the input box in HTML5. Other types include email as well as date. That will provide a calendar picker in many browsers. Other types to be aware of are the radio button types, as well as the number type, which will give us this type of spinner control, and the range type. And here is the checkbox control for yes/no questions. Finally, even the submit and cancel buttons are input elements. Every form, if the data is to go anywhere, needs an input element with the type equals submit. And most of the time, we also have a button right by the submit button of type reset so that we can reset our form and start over. Now going back to the top, I've skipped over many of the attributes that are in the input element, focusing on type, because type tells us the type of box we're going to get, whether we're going to get a box or a radio button or a slider or a checkbox. It also tells us what type of data is going to be entered into the field. I also have a couple other interesting attributes here. Placeholder provides this text to prompt the user as to what to put in the field before they start typing. The placeholder text gets replaced with the value as soon as you start typing. The required attribute will force the user to fill out something in that field before it's submitted to the server. So if I click submit my survey, I'm getting a prompt by the browser to fill out this field for any field that has required attribute set to required. Interestingly, Notepad++ is not quite sure about the required attribute. It's colored it in black instead of red, just to alert you that perhaps not all browsers are going to be able to read that attribute yet. So the input element, along with its descriptive label, is the workhorse element of a form. Thank you.